Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Martine Rouleau. I'm the 2020 producer, and I speak of the role in the present, even though the project has finished in 2024, because a lot of the work that drew me to this project in the first place is still ongoing. A lot of the thinking, reflection, practice, collaborative doing is still very much ongoing, and I very much want to keep it alive and kicking, and so important to have moments to be all together like we do today. We've not had the opportunity to do many of these gatherings, but they are very, very rich, and they are very, very fruitful. Thank you, Drew. In what was a crisis of care, we prioritized in 2020 working with care. It didn't always work. It sometimes took us more time. It sometimes worked for some, but not for others. And we figured a lot out through doing it and through talking about it and being open about sometimes lacking the time, lacking the space, lacking the energy, but always taking the time to step back and reflect. And I think we've been very lucky, Ramatullah, myself, Susan, to feel supported in taking that step back at every step, whenever possible, and understanding the value of thinking back on what worked and what didn't and why, and how could we still do better. So working with care for us meant working carefully, thoughtfully, and always thinking back about what it meant to bring people into a space. Is it a safe space? What's the nature of the invitation? What are we supporting? How are we resourcing this invitation? Thinking about working with care is something that still matters a great deal to me. And I'm very thankful to Shanice and Yen and all of the artists who spoke this morning about centering that caring for oneself and caring for others. And it is a buzzword, Shanice. Thank you for actually saying it. I still have moments of going, ugh. But I pushed through that discomfort because it isn't something that can be supplanted with something else, and it's not something that should be neglected and that will go away. So we are still very much centering care in how we work, and this is a conversation rather than doing care at someone. So this conversation is ongoing this afternoon, and I'm very lucky to be chairing a conversation with Madi Acharya-Baskerville, who was in residency with the Lightbox, Holly Graham, who was in residency with Manchester Art Gallery, Jessica Ashman, who was in residency with Bristol Art Gallery, and Billy Dosanjh, who was in residency with Wolverhampton Art Gallery. Let's see if that clicker works. I'm going backwards. No, we're not going back to lunch. Here we are. So, Madi, if you would like to take over.
Hello, everyone. It's a real delight to be speaking to you at this symposium. Thanks very much for inviting me, Susan and Martine. My residency was at the Lightbox, which is in Woking and in Surrey, for those of you who haven't been. And I started my journey by going to Woking Palace, walking to Woking Palace on a really hot day. A lot of my... Oh. What happened?
It's just...
Oh. Sound again. So much of my practice involves going for a walk initially, walking the coastline, walking along the Thames. So to me it felt very apt to approach this by walking to Woking Palace. So this is a slide of sort of approaching Woking Palace. You can see on the left there's one intact building, but all the rest of it is a ruin. And that was really important, the actual kind of the palace and the memories that it evoked. So I looked at the heritage collection in Woking Story and also the reserve collection at Heather Farm, which is nearby. And as soon as going to Woking Story, what interested me most were the archaeological finds that came from the grounds of Woking Palace. So here is another image of Woking Palace. You can see the locked door, which was really, I was very intrigued by this because there was no way in and I wanted to know what was in there. So it really kind of, my imagination took fire as to what might be inside, which I did find out later, and it's in the film outside actually. So the walls were really interesting, the textures on the walls. Mainly it was just sort of walls, and then you could just see the blue sky, and there weren't any other rooms. The particular objects that interested me are in the next slides. So this is me looking at the various objects in a Tudor costume that I found in the dressing up box. I was very happy. This is a key that I actually found in the reserve collection, and it was huge actually. And I just couldn't. Nobody seemed to know what the key was for, so I decided it was for the locked door in the Woking Palace building. And then I decided to make another one in black clay. And I'm very interested in South Asian textiles and patterns. And so on the pattern, which is painted in silver on the black clay, comes from one of my favourite patterns in an Indian miniature painting. I spend quite a lot of time looking at Indian miniature paintings, and I think that kind of comes across in quite a lot of my practice. This is a ceramic, 16th century ceramic toy horse fragment, which was in Woking Story. And this also really interested me because it was a fragment, and I wanted to know what the whole was like, and who played with it, and the hole in the middle was also intriguing. And then this is Bartman, bearded man, which is a jug that originates from Germany, and Cardinal Bellarmine. And there's a whole story behind that about alcohol and storing alcohol in these jugs. Oyster shells were in abundance in the heritage collection, and I'm very drawn to oyster shells. I find them all the time in the Thames, and I have many different kinds. So my activities during the residency involved walks along the Basingstoke Canal, which the Lightbox is adjacent to. So the canal stretches 2 kilometres, and it's a really important, prominent part of Woking, and some people walk along that canal every day. I visited the reserve collection at Heather Farm. I made drawings and watercolours throughout the residency, and also did community engagement workshops at the Shah Jahan Mosque, and also drop-in workshops at the Lightbox. And then I also kind of walked along the Thames as well as a parallel activity. The works I made for the commission were ceramics, which I'll talk to you about. This slide is from my initial visit to the reserve collection at Heather Farm, where I made these 4 watercolours. Another thing to add was that the Valencian tiles really interested me, and they would have lined the floor of Woking Palace, and apparently they were in abundance in Woking Palace, but rare elsewhere. I also then made these forms in ceramic based on the tiles, which kind of ended up looking a bit like hot water bottles, which I quite liked. So I was really taken by the blue and the sort of the really pale background of the tiles. So this is from a walk along the Basingstoke Canal, and I started my residency in October 2022, where all the leaves were sort of falling onto the water in the canal, and it was just really beautiful to look at. And I was struck by how beautiful this was, right next to a fairly industrialized area and a shopping centre, and there was quite a lot of birds and nature. And also I liked the fact that there was this tin can lid floating in the water, kind of pretending to be a leaf. This is called On the Way to Woking Palace. This is one of the works I made inspired by walking along the Basingstoke Canal and also the toy horse remnant. So it's now in the collection of the Lightbox, and it's actually on display at the moment, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. This is a watercolour from the Chertsey Palace floor tile, and this work, the Chertsey oyster, was inspired by the oyster shell and also the pattern on the Chertsey tile. And I wanted to create a sort of a mask-like presence, but it wouldn't really be a mask because it would be too heavy to wear. So I like this idea of creating an object that's wearable, but then it's not really wearable either. I was thinking about the Tudor Palace, and there was a lot of enjoyment and entertainment that went along for Henry VIII. So I decided to make these oyster bowls, which are in porcelain, and they are sort of modelled on this, inspired by oyster shells. This is another one. This is called Oyster Experiment. I've used porcelain and black clay and layering this as an experiment, which was good too. It was really good to experiment with materials during the residency. This is Bartman. The one on the right is a Bartman that I created. I was really interested. I was thinking about Anna Mendiata and her imprint on Earth, and that inspired me to kind of, with all the shapes of carving into the clay, sort of carving into the earth. This is from a walk along the Thames, and the objects I was finding in the Thames, near the Thames, were very similar to the ones that I was finding in the Heritage Collection. So it felt really interesting to have this parallel process, and it felt just sort of right for my practice. It kind of all seemed to make sense. I visited the Shah Jahan Mosque as part of thinking about the community engagement and thinking about the sort of the different cultural groups, and met with the mosque manager to think about engaging the mosque students from the mosque as part of my commission. And so we devised a competition for the students, where they were asked to make a design inspired by Islamic architecture, which then might work its way into the final commission. So here I've made 2 ceramic pieces which were actually inspired by the drawings that the students made. This has gone a bit funny on the, it's become another work, I think. This is a palace from Rajasthan called Chittor, and throughout this project I was thinking about this idea of a palace, Woking Palace, and then thinking about my childhood experiences of going to different palaces in Rajasthan. And this palace, which is Chittor, really kind of is on my mind quite a lot. It's a ruin, a lot of it is ruined, kind of a little bit similar to Woking Palace, but this is on a kind of a very grand scale. With the community, with the drop-in sessions I did at the Lightbox, I was interested in this idea of participants designing their own palace from egg boxes, because my work is predominantly with found materials and also discarded materials, and I'm very interested in packaging as well as other finds. These are on the left, the samples that I made ahead of the workshop, and then on the right, photographs of what the participants had created. So my solo exhibition at the Lightbox was called I Dream a Palace, and I was really fortunate to get a National Lottery project grant for this, and that came as a direct outcome of the 2020 project. And I was also really fortunate to have the backing and massive support of the Lightbox to apply for this grant. With this grant, I was able to further develop working with ceramics and textiles. And there's always a conflict in my mind working with ceramics because of the energy it takes in their production. And so I wanted to combine them with discarded elements, discarded textiles, discarded fishing net debris, and some of those works are upstairs that you can see. I was able to do further participatory projects. One was called Art on the Boat, and actually this was on a boat where South Asian women and women from other cultural groups participated, and I worked with a charity called Shisha, which is a local charity that works with women who are vulnerable or have mental health problems. And that was real fun. I hired a boat and we went along the Basingstoke Canal, and the group actually brought samosas with them, which I didn't ask them to bring the samosas. Anyone's wondering? Yeah. The participants brought them. They were delicious. And we also did a clay workshop inspired by Bartman. I became really obsessed with Bartman, actually, and I made several Bartman sculptures. And this was all possible because of the National Lottery project grant. This is from the show I Dream a Palace. So here are some objects that I've created in black clay inspired by the metal objects in the reserve collection, and oyster shells. This is an install shot of the show with the 3 different Bartmans, all the works, and also the fishing net works, which inspired the textile components of the ceramic works. Oh, God. Oh, can I just very quickly? Oh, this is in the show, because I'm coming to the really important bit now. Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Oh. Right, yeah, okay, very quickly. Working with the Lightbox was a fantastic experience, absolutely brilliant. Initially, there was a difficulty with engaging the community because I went down a few blind alleys, but in the end, it all worked out really well. And then there were problems, managing staff expectations and my expectations as well in terms of other priorities for the gallery. And then outcomes of 2020, I feel that my visibility as an artist is much greater now, and it was really great to work with such a large budget, because I was then shortlisted for the first Plinth Public Art Award, and I was able to say that I'd managed a large budget because of the 2020 project in the interview, and I'm sure that made some difference, actually. So that was brilliant. And then I also had a primary residency prize, and it really helped me to think about 2020 and the connections that I'd made when I was kind of in Nottingham. And it's also given me lots of other ideas, larger scale works for the future, and also objects that have stayed in my mind, actually, that were in the reserve collection and also their collection. So, okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Cool. Okay, where to look? My name's Jessica Ashman. I was with Bristol Museum and Art Gallery in residence, and I'm going to try and condense maybe the biggest project I've ever done into 10 minutes. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I work with textiles, animation, music, performance, music. Did I say music? Yeah. And this was, just a really interesting time for me, very blessed, completely transformed my practice. But of course, I was dealing with institutions, so yes, there were ups and downs. So I was working with Bristol Museum and Art Gallery from summer 23 to autumn 24, so all in all about 15 months. I was working closely with Julia Carver, who was the curator of arts, and Stephen Bradley, exhibitions and displays manager. So I'm not two presentations going at the same time. So my response to that residence was my solo exhibition, Those That Do Not Smile Will Kill Me, Decolonizing Jamaican Flora, which ran from Feb 25 to July 25. And this was my first time being in residence at an art institution. So the exhibition was a series of works, which included a digital print on Osnaburg cotton called Rebellion Abundant in All Parts, an installation combining paintings on silk with acrylic sculpture and animated projections. I'm going to go into sort of the research and the detail around these amazing characters I created. Okay, will this play? A soundscape made in collaboration with musician Eau Claire. This is a short clip which shows some documentation of the installation as well. For time's sake. There was also a performance of the soundscape called All Power Emanates from the Land, and that was with Tanya Auclair in the space itself of the main installation as a kind of intervention in May 2025, which was really interesting to try and perform like a rock punk show in a listed building. So yes, this project really was extended to the limit. So I'm going to talk sort of briefly about the universe of this project, what inspired the work and its legacy. I've been making so many extra notes listening to all the other artists talk, and I wish I could redo this whole presentation, but someone mentioned in the panel talk about pressure, and I definitely feel I succumbed to pressure with this exhibition by doing the most I've kind of ever done, which I am so proud of, but at the same time, I'm like, at what cost, really? We'll maybe talk about the cost. So I went into 2020 wanting to explore past work on utopian concepts for Black Caribbean diaspora. My ancestry is Jamaican, and I wanted to look with this concept in mind with Jamaica's landscape and botany. This was a provocation I sort of posed in my interview for 2020, a historical hell leading to a future heaven, resisting oblivion. And I was interested in what utopia looks like to the oppressed and the oppressors, and what stories will I find with that sort of prompt at hand. And I saw this possibility to explore these concepts in free collections at BMAG. So I initially focused in on the British Empire and Commonwealth collection, BEC for short, with the help of BMAG archivists Jane Pucknell and Francis Davis. So the BEC collection documents the links between Britain and countries of its empire from the late 19th century to kind of recent times. And I was interested primarily with artifacts to do with Bristol St. Paul's Carnival because I've sort of had a past history working with kind of carnival celebrations and how to connect that to second and third generation Caribbean diaspora, and how those celebrations evoke utopia and paradise, especially within sort of traditional mass celebrations in Jamaica, and seeing if any of those mass celebrations had a connection to botany and horticulture. At the same time as this, I was training to be a gardener, which I finished my training, yay. Hire me for your organic gardening needs. So kind of the separate strands of my practice were starting to connect. So when I applied to 2020, I was really looking to kind of expand that research I'm doing physically in my horticulture training, but also within the archive. But it was discovering these sets of letters from a Scottish pharmacist called John Small in the Beck collection. And the Beck collection is really overwhelming. It's like photos from a travelogue to a knitted blanket from someone's house to this collection of letters. And it was quite difficult to traverse, to find like an angle for the kind of concepts I wanted to explore. And also, it was really hard to read because this is all very cursive, and I was struggling, and the archivists are amazing and helped me to understand what was being written here. But it was these letters which pushed me towards thinking about biology and land. So Small was the owner of a coconut plantation in Jamaica, and he would write back home to his family in Scotland, in Dundee, sort of slagging off the Caribbean, basically, but also saying to come to Jamaica, make your fortune. And in one of those letters, Small lists the natural resources of 1800s Jamaica. I kept calling it a colonial shopping list, which has things like banana, guava, tamarind, and how these were abundant in all parts. Jamaica was the land of milk and honey. And that kind of got me thinking about this, obvious fact of the Caribbean as a place of exploration and extraction, but to see it written down within the archives, so physical, really wanted to make me think, okay, who is being exploited within these, reading in between the lines of these letters, who is being exploited? That kind of connected me to the biology department, because I was starting to think about biology and the collections within that department further. So I worked with Rian Rowson, who was the curator of biology, and she was amazing. The first time I met her, she didn't, 5 minutes already, she didn't want to utter the names of the men who did all this collection. And I was like, okay, this is an energy I can get behind. I don't mind mentioning the names, but at the same time, I love that you don't want to give power to these people. One of these collections I looked at was a series of watercolour paintings and drawings by Reverend John Lindsay, collected in a volume called The Elegancies of Jamaica. And Lindsay was a priest who inhabited Jamaica in the 1700s, and he married into a plantation family and benefited basically from the work of enslaved people due to his wife. These are some more pages from The Elegancies of Jamaica. Lindsay kind of embodied the energy of that quote, have the confidence of a mediocre white man, because he didn't have a history of botanist training, but he would write to kind of the academy with his drawings, wanting them to be published. He was trying to attract the attention of people like Joseph Banks, a naturalist, a botanist, kind of godfather of Kew, and I also was really intrigued by the sort of format of how he would use things like spiders, playing cards as reference to scale and size for fruits, and have these quite sort of surreal compositions. Another collection I looked at was the herbarium of Dr. Arthur Broughton, who collected plants which were put into volumes of pressed plants whilst he was living in Jamaica in the 1700s. He was a physician, botanist, and horticulturist who moved to Bristol in 1784. But it was unlikely that Broughton would have collected these specimens from the island himself. It would have been the work of an enslaved African person in Jamaica, whose name was not noted anywhere, as desperate as I was to find it. As I kept researching, I was noticing these background, unnamed figures in Lindsay's drawings. In the Beck collection, I would see nameless people in the background of travelogue photography collections. And I wanted to know what paradise could mean to these people when I'm looking at these drawings and these prints through a colonialist and imperialist lens. What connection did the plants on this island have to the enslaved workforce who would have been the closest to them, who would have grown them, who would have toiled the lands, whilst what I am seeing is the kind of language of prestige, the language of making money, and I want to see beyond that. This post-it note, which was said to me by Martine in one of our catch-up meetings, helped crystallize a bit of my thinking that the gap is the fact, that I wasn't going to find the stories I was looking for, so I was going to have to create them So I started to explore the local names of the plants drawn by Lindsay, which would have been in patois, and told stories of their uses, their effects, their properties. I wanted to kind of imagine a sort of alternative timeline of Jamaica where abundance was possible. I was reading into the lives of the enslaved people of Jamaica through stories of resistance, histories of foods, communities formed from rebellion. These are a few of the texts I was reading. And just trying to sort of familiarize myself with whose story I'm telling here, because, again, it's not being presented in the collections I was looking at. So I approached this project at the beginning as a chance to really evolve my practice and cement a lot of sort of disparate ideas I've had over the years. The length of this residency allowed me to meander away from animation and explore what I like to think of as an expanded animation practice. Okay, let's hurry through. So yes, it was transformative in the sense that I could connect all of these separate elements, which I've been doing alongside my practice, into a whole. So the legacy of 2020, which I'll try and talk about in a minute, or less than a minute. So legacy of 2020, thus far, like immediate legacy, it brought about some amazing collaborations, most notably 2 commissioned essays, one from curator Debbie Manuru and historian and writer Zakiya Mackenzie. And I have some of these on hand and they're in the foyer, so please grab a copy if you'd like to read. I was offered a new solo show based on the work from Bristol in the summer at a gallery in Loughborough with modern painters, new decorators, and that allowed me to explore further this idea of, concepts of the paradise for the people who are toiling the land, and also look more into natural dyes and this way of kind of using the actual plants itself that I'm researching into making the work in a more embodied way. Maybe I won't play this, but it does a still. The soundscape and the music made for BMAG was developed into an audio-visual performance, which we performed at Supernova Festival this year. Okay, I'm going to skip it, I'm sorry. And it's going to be performed later at Cafe Oto alongside my fellow 2020 artist, Shanice Arifa. Please come along, and 30th November. Thank you for listening.
Hello, and thank you. And it's been such a pleasure sort of being here with everyone and kind of hearing from so many of the artists who've been sort of on similar but very different journeys. And yeah, similarly to Jess, I've been making notes all day and sort of rethinking my whole presentation. But I will stick to it. And yeah, there'll be time, I'm sure, afterwards in the discussion to sort of pick up some of those points. But yeah, maybe just to start, I really appreciated, I said it earlier over lunch, Shanice, you sort of bringing into the space that sort of connection to kind of de-abstracting some of the weight of lots of what we're talking about, or lots of what many of us are looking at and responding to in these collections is very, very violent and it's visceral. But I think there's a tendency to kind of close ourselves off from that to some degree. And really appreciated you bringing that space to kind of actually feel it and connect to it again. For those of you who aren't so familiar with my work, I am a multidisciplinary artist. I work a lot thinking about memory broadly speaking, individual, collective memory, how slippery and how malleable that is, and how kind of we bring these strands and fragments of narrative and memory together to form senses of history or histories. I work a lot with and in response to collections of material. So again, thinking about the fragmentary, thinking about these attempts to kind of fix or pin down material that might be kind of resistant or amorphous in some way. So I work a lot with archive and museum collections. Though this, I guess, the 2020 project offered the first opportunity to really work in a really in-depth, sustained way from within an institution and its collection. So that was a really exciting possibility. And I'm really interested in the idea of sort of amplifying some of the quieter histories or narratives that don't maybe receive so much airtime. So my project draws on, and I think we've already had Christina Sharp's name in the room in a couple of, voiced a couple of times and on slides, which is great to see. And similarly, I was thinking a lot about Sharp's framing of the wake as aftermath, as mourning, as alertness, and kind of thinking about, her framing of life lived in the aftermath of slavery. So you have here this, in the wake, the past that is not past reappears always to rupture the present. And I was thinking about it alongside these words that were spoken, which you can see at the top here, by Black African-American abolitionist Sarah Parker Remond, who visited Manchester and spoke at the space, the Athenaeum, which would later become part of Manchester Art Gallery's footprint in 1859. And she spoke about walking through the streets of Manchester and seeing load after load of cotton and remembering that not 1 cent of the money had ever reached the hands of the labourers. So I was thinking about what that means in terms of sort of reparation, what that means in terms of this sort of legacy that is rupturing the present. And what it means in terms of, I guess I wanted to kind of use the opportunity to think about legacies of expansionism, colonialism, exploitative labour, inherent to the material history of cotton, which is like so central to Manchester's history, the city's history. And it's really connected to it's kind of, I guess, that industry fueled the city and the city's institutions. So how that comes back to Manchester Art Gallery. So this is the Athenaeum. So these are the two sites, the two buildings or the institutions that now form Manchester Art Gallery. And there's a sort of glass atrium that joins the two. So I started looking at a huge range of objects, but I sort of came back to these pattern books. I was also looking at patchworks and the dress collection. I wanted to kind of speak to people as well and think about, I guess I was thinking about this material history as a way in to thinking about, or the material as a way into thinking about these wider histories. So, so I wanted to kind of speak with people about their relationship to the material and use that as a starting point. These are some of the sort of objects I looked at that became like really integral to the work. I guess these are Manchester checks or guinea cloth. They're a sort of simple woven, mass-produced fabric, textiles, sort of informed by Madras checks, but made, so South Asian textiles, but then made for export to parts of West Africa, hence the term guinea cloth, in exchange for goods, including enslaved people. So I was really struck by the sort of circularity or the triangularity of these objects in their telling of these like histories of colonial expansion, of enslaved labour, of exploitative labour. And so this is from some of the sort of sessions that I did with people, kind of thinking about exploring some of those histories as well as our like personal connections to material together. I also collaborated with some early career researchers via an initiative called Global Threads, which is a collaboration between the Science and Industry Museum and UCL's Centre for the Study of Legacies of Slavery. Sort of working really closely with Dr. Matt Stallard, who Inbal mentioned earlier. And with those, with the researchers, we kind of took a few different strands as starting points for thinking about, I guess, maybe to come back to, like, I guess, again, Shanice mentioning a hunch. I guess I had a hunch in terms of, like, what I was thinking about these connections to the institution, but in some ways it was like drawing out these threads of evidence, like how do you evidence that? And so there are a few strands that the researchers looked at, but one of the starting points was thinking about the names of individuals who were the first subscribers to the Royal Manchester Institution, which was the like sort of institutional forerunner of Manchester Art Gallery. So we took that's some of the researchers, so a really grainy picture of the researchers and me. And that logbook that you saw before, that was the kind of logbook that sits in the Manchester Central Library that has that list of subscribers, and it's here again, so that's the end papers that I became sort of mesmerised by. But I was looking in the book at all of these names of subscribers, and I was really thinking about kind of actually whose labour isn't, or whose contribution, if you like, isn't evidenced or visualised in these logbooks. And so with the researchers, we took one or two names, including Mary Gregg and the Gregg family, who had a huge mill called Quarrybank Mill in south of Manchester, and who also were huge donors to Manchester Art Gallery in terms of some of the objects in the collection, and started to kind of look at these links between the cotton industry and also histories of enslaved labour. The Greggs owned a plantation in Dominica, and obviously the cotton that they were getting for their mill was being picked and supplied by enslaved labour. So we were looking at a few of these different strands, and the work kind of was very multi-layered, but ultimately I ended up developing this costume. So I wanted to kind of think back to Sarah Parker Remond, back to her words in the Athenaeum, and to think about sort of projecting this critical voice back into the architecture of the gallery, back into that space. So I worked with my mum, who used to be a costumier, so I invited her out of retirement to come and collaborate with me, which was really exciting, and developed this costume that had these different layers which kind of drew on the internal end papers of the logbooks, as well as the sort of check from the guinea cloth, the Manchester check, and that sort of referenced also these like grids of accounting books, thinking about how we sort of log and record and name and who is not named as well. And that there, this print is one of the 2020 prints from the edition that now resides with each collection partner. And this label here is from one of those logbooks. So it says Royal Manchester Institution, names of parties who have assented to pay the annual guinea. So I was really interested in this idea of assent and consent, and who actually has assented and who hasn't. So the costume was sort of this centre point, and as many of you are aware, the sort of initial starting point of 2020 was that it was an acquisition project, so we were making an artwork that would be then acquired, but inevitably there becomes a conversation or a dialogue about how that's then shown, how it's shared. And so that started a kind of another conversation with Natasha Howells initially about exhibiting the work and that there would be an exhibition. So following Natasha's departure, I worked with other members of the curatorial team, including Rosie, who's in the room now, to co-curate an exhibition which I don't know if I've put it up here, I haven't, but that is essentially the costume is in the centre of the room, and I think, and you talked about like having these other elements of the collection kind of satellited around, almost like an extended bibliography or, citation, these like other elements that I was looking at that were informing the development of the work. So this operated quite similarly. And this image here is of the costume, which is modelled on the silhouette of a dress worn by Sarah Parker Remond, but with these kind of projections of the books, of the log books, of the pattern books, facing this painting from the Royal Exchange, which is a different space, a different institutional space at the heart of Manchester, but that was also one that really speaks about sort of the centre of commerce, heart of cotton industry, and many of these individuals who paid to be in this painting, by the way, were also members or subscribers to the Royal Manchester Institution. So there's a lot of overlap there. And I really like this image, and I know Enbul showed a similar one earlier, because lots of the framing of the exhibition was also kind of thinking a bit about staging and setting up these dialogues and these like critical interplays between the objects. So I guess in terms of thinking about the experience and reflecting on it a little bit, as mentioned, I've worked a lot with collections previously, and sometimes in more informal ways, like personal sort of family archives or community archives, or in some instances museum collections, but where I've sort of been external to the museum and I've been sort of making, not necessarily as a commissioned artist who's been invited in, but just someone who's like responding, thinking like independently of that. So this felt like a really exciting opportunity to be invited in and to be able to sort of tap into some of that sort of expertise within the collections, within the institution, within the curatorial team, and to have real access and time to spend with lots of the materials. And I remember feeling really like aghast, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe like this person's just having a chat with me for like hours. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's the project. Like, we're all being paid to be here. It's great. So yeah, it felt very special in that respect. And yeah, that resourcing of the time was kind of crucial and is crucial to this sort of like open-ended work for something to be, we talked about sort of things being potentially experimental and risk-taking and not knowing what the end outcome will be. And I think in order for that to be the case, there needs to be that like time and space. And so I think that's something that through the budget and through the sort of timeline, the 2020 project did provide. Those kind of check-in moments as well, I think, were really crucial with Martine and Ramatulai, so really grateful to you. I can't see Ramatulai at the moment. Oh, hi. And also, like, the signposting you did back to our fellow artists, so our peer group, I think that felt really rich, and there were moments where you sort of said, I don't know, actually, but maybe go and talk to so-and-so, or go and ask the group chat, and those became really useful moments as well. And it's been, for me, a moment to like really critically reflect on what it means to try and channel some form of decolonial practice through work with institutions. I think my time's up, but yeah, I guess just to wrap up briefly, the project has kind of continued to have other offshoots and legs. I think Enbul started to signpost to some of those, so we've had some funding, thanks to sort of Manchester Art Gallery being really open to everything that I've thrown their way, from the Museum Renewal Fund to develop a performance. So there will be a sort of gallery tour style performance with me wearing the dress, which feels like a risk. And that will be also made into a documentation film, which will become part of like the wider artwork as well. As mentioned, we're also working towards kind of shaping an annual Sarah Parker Ramond lecture. And that's something that's come about, again, in dialogue with like the researchers that I've been able to work with. So thinking about like actually how does something continue beyond the, project, the concise project that might have been initiated or commissioned. Like what's the legacy of that, and how is there sort of longer term institutional commitment and citywide involvement in that as well. I will end there, and there have been many other sort of like little offshoots, but maybe those will kind of come in the conversation. So thank you.
See a picture there. Cool. All right, we're off. It's been really okay. So I'm Billy. I'm from the Black Country, where the gallery that I partnered with are obviously in the Black Country as well. So it was a bit of a homecoming for me, which puts a sort of different complexion on it, really, because you're sort of very associated with the place. But I met Susan and Martine, I think in March 2023, a few months after my first child had been born. So I was sort of weeks, yeah. So I was on one, worrying about like what's this world has come into, the political, and personal. Can I be a dad? Can I do this? And then also, started to think a lot about the world that it's entered and worrying about it. So there was a real sort of a lot of commotion going on in my head at the time, and I thought with this residency, it got my dopamine pumping a little bit, because that sense of mission of like making change as a group of creators really sort of got me dancing a bit, So I turned up, I think, all Billy Big Balls, and sort of like. I just talked my way into this, because I didn't realise it was so competitive till today. Actually, I was just like, I started like that, and just to speak a bit about me as an artist. So, like, I've spent my career obsessed with stories in the Black Country of empire workers coming in the 50s and 60s, and thinking about that in mythic terms. So, thinking about the separation, the threshold, and then the never to return, and the consequences of the never to return. To me, I've been the sort of bedrock of my artistic practice for like 2 decades, and I'm still at it, really. I'll explain a bit about why that's important. But yeah, that's a picture of the gallery. I had my reservations because, I'm from there, so I had a sort of bee in my bonnet about local institutes. So as soon as I grew legs, I disappeared to London. Like you do, taking a lot of risk on because you don't feel where you're from sees you. So this was quite interesting to try and sort of, take that on as a sort of idea. But yeah, also just to say, when we started the residency, the world was such a different place. Like we just had the George Floyd, just had the Plinth stuff going on. And we fast forward a few years, and now the far right's at the centre of our political system, and it's quite that's my lad up there, by the way. So it's quite an interesting sort of journey we've been on, because I thought we were on this sort of like surfing this wave of like real transformational change, and I'll come on to it in a later stage. But yeah, cool, man. So obviously you're at the museum in their basement, dicking around with their sort of collections manager. Every other Friday, and getting to know them, and just like learning, what this place is. And there were many routes we could have all taken, and obviously the thing that you don't realise when you sign up to this, especially me, because I can't really find my way out of a brown paper bag, let alone sort of plan a few months ahead. So I never knew when I signed up just the enormity of decolonisation, because to take on a residency about decolonisation, you then have to go and learn about colonisation. Or at least that's how I felt. And so I just went on this big journey, lots of dense history books, lots of high-level conceptual art books that just went right over my head. But I tried to sort of engage them. And one of the books that I read was a book by Catherine Youssef called 1 Billion Black Anthropocenes, which is just a dense book, man. But it got me super interested in where I'm from. I mean, the Black Country on a deep time basis, has all this coal on the surface. The Black Country is, if you really think about it, an origin point for all technological change in our society. It has this really powerful story, and I've been sort of dancing around the edge of it in the 50s and 60s. So with this residency, I was just like, right, I want to do something about technological change. And so in their permanent collection, they've got these paintings by amazing painters. This is by Butler Baylis, and they're of slag heaps. They're of like the Black Country when it was Mordor, of like Lord of the Rings, because that's literally where it was inspired by. And so I got really into looking at those paintings, really like enamoured by the landscape, but also really aware that in these paintings there was an erasure of history. There was an erasure of these characters who'd left their farms, ancestral farms, during the Enclosures Act, post-Henrification of the UK. They left a lot of their traditions and they joined this industrial world, but in none of their paintings is their face. And that's been something that I've been sort of reckoning with in my career with the Empire workers when they came and had these extraordinary three-dimensional emotional experiences, on the threshold, never to return. The camera's not been there. And it was so interesting with these workers that, again, their stories aren't in the work, So that got me kind of like, quite excited about what you could do. So just also to say, when we started the residency, ChatGPT just came out. And so people were talking a lot about technology. And I went off to this thing that Susan did. Susan's quite an unbusy lady, clearly. But she organised a very extraordinary seminar at the Tate called Museums, Machines and Me. And that for me was a super big unlock. Because if you think about the Black Country as a birthpoint of technological innovation, then maybe there's a story in that carries an echo today. And so that's what I started to try to think about. So just sort of scroll through these. But so what I started to do was I've got a few friends. Bear in mind, this is like 2023, so things aren't where they are now. But I had a few friends who are good with technology, and we just talked a bit about, can I make a data set with these amazing old paintings, tag the hell out of it, and also put in photos in my personal collection of Empire workers from the video work of like Philip Donnellan, who's a great avant-garde artist who was based in Birmingham, BBC, early 60s. So I started to put together these images and create bespoke training data sets so that I could have a sort of conversation with the machine and try and make the machine give me stories I've never been able to get to. Because a lot of my practice is as a storyteller, really. So I go and gather tales and I think about them, but it takes a long time to sort of make art out of those tales, and I just thought the machine could help me get there. And I could also maybe use the machine to help me gift it back into the ecosystem, because these things don't exist to date. So that was part of what I was doing, and it turned out that Susan's whole thing was about that as well. But these are some of the still frames of the factories in the 60s, so I was very interested in, obviously screwed up the aspect ratio here, but very interested in their facial expressions, and also, the white workers have got their clean jackets, and it's the guys who can't speak English who are sort of walking around, getting stuffed, and that was really interesting. So I did the machine, and so got the thing working, and then I started to just put little stories and anecdotes that I'd thought about or collected in the past and into the machine. And obviously, every 999 outcomes are just shocking. But every 1 out of 1,000, it hits the spot for me on an emotional level. So when this one came out the machine, I was just like, this is singing to me as a person from where I'm from. So I've got like the title, but I've got the prompt that I'd used at the time. So just got into the continuum of the technology and thinking about the computer chip as the foundry of today. So a lot of that industrial work that was done then in that bigger space now exists in the chip. And I just wanted to have a conversation with that concept, if you like, some really, I thought, haunting and classy images, really. Again, just to speak to the idea of people on the threshold knowing they're never going to return in this industrial world, having left farms, ancestral, where you can see the Himalayas in a clear day, and your connection to nature is very different to what it becomes. And for me, there was an echo in that, and the paintings that had the faceless, workers in them. There's a sort of like history on loop. And actually, I think with a lot of us here, there is a sort of thing, isn't there, around rhetorical tautologies, if you like, or just to say, we just say the same stuff all the time, don't we, about othering and race and stuff. And I think there was something about the othering of the people coming from Shropshire and other places, and the lives of these characters, really. So that's partly what I was up to. So I liked what came out the other end, basically. And then I just thought that was my eureka moment, you know. So the machine really sort of wowed me then. And since then, I've been on a real sort of... I've been on a real sort of like academic, sort of not academic, but like a real mission to learn what this technology is, how gradient descent works, how positional encoding works, how parallelization works. I started to learn all of these iconic essays and proofs of work for various concepts in new technology that have changed the field. And so I've become a real sort of tech geek, really, which I think I wanted to be when I was younger, but I didn't have the bravery to follow it through and chose something different, you know. But so it's been nice to sort of pivot back to that. Sorry, I know I'm banging on, and you know, I haven't got much time. 5 minutes, great. So I've got a 4-minute film clip at the end, so I'll stop right now. But so this prompt, so some of the literature that we had, you know, the books about doing the work had some amazing provocations in them. So I started putting some of the provocations into the machine as well. And anyway, there was this quote in that book, I think, you know, and I put that in, and this image came out after like 100 images. And I was just like, that's the thing I want to give to the various places. So yeah, really interested in computer chips, really interested in the way that they use silicon wafers and use light to sort of put all of the, for want of a better term, the lines in it that carry the sort of electrons. And so I learned that there's also a photopolymer technique that does something very similar with silicon wafers. And so thanks to the amazing Martine, I got given a sort of apprenticeship at Thameside Print Studios. So every other week I'd go down there. It was often pretty hungover, to be honest, but like cycle down from like my partner's place in Ali Palace. That's a really long cycle. So you're fresh by the end of it, and and you're in there, you know, working and making some really cool stuff, you know, and so yeah, I got really into this, actually, I've got to say, and I got into learning about how, you know, this technology works. And so that became part of my outputs. Obviously, you butcher the first load, and then you get better and better. And by the end of it, I wanted to keep doing it, but the residence ended, and, you know, you've got to think about other things, really. But yeah, you know, so these are some of the works I've got shown upstairs. This Fabrica paper, the photopolymer print etching type technique, and yeah, I like them. And so this thing in the middle is what I gave... gifted to the gallery, which we'll talk about later. One of the other things I wanted to do with my thing was synthesize some of the ideas about the factory and the computer chip. So I worked with a CAD developer in Taiwan, and he and I, when I showed him some sketches, put this thing together. So that sort of went on his own journey, you know, all of these proofs. So that was a whole new thing for me. Sculpture, obviously printed sculpture, but still sculpting nonetheless. And I've never painted in my life, so I had to sit in my flat and paint this for like a month, and which was just like, you know, giggles, you know, because obviously you're learning something new, but you don't need to watch all of this, but you can see what's happening. And that's what came out the other end. And so that's on display here as a sculpture. So so I'm pretty proud of that, to be honest. That took a lot of effort, and obviously everyone said it already, but, you know, it's such an odyssey, this residency, and if I'd have known what it was going to be at the start... I think I'd have still done it, but like, you know, I think I'd have, but maybe differently. But you know, so yeah, so that's maybe like to say to you and to talk a bit about where I'm at and stuff. So like, out of this residency, I've totally just thought, fuck art, you know, I'm done with it. I'm going to go and do something else with my life. But that's just the classic, you know, you finished and you're in that little empty period. But out of it, through the learning of technology that I've been doing, through thinking about like deep time and ancestral stories, I've now developed some funding apps with the Arts Council where I continue on this journey of finding the mythic in the everyday with local stories in the Black Country. So I'm doing a VR project, and you know, I think in December I've got a few quid off HLF, so we're doing free fine art live action photographs in the Black Country set in the 60s. I think, yeah, I think that's partly that. I think I have to say that I've also set up a technology company since this residency. Got my first client this week. That involves money, which is dangerous with me. But yeah, like out of all that learning, I realised I was well ahead of the curve in terms of just where people are at with it. And so I've been able to exploit that a little bit and try and set up a business that can keep me alive in fraught times, because I'm finding getting commissions harder, not easier actually. But that might be my age. You know, it's just not the new thing anymore. You know, it was for a bit. maybe a season. And then, yeah, I think like with the gallery I work with, I've got to say, I found when I signed up to this, I thought there'd be a real two-way street and there'll be a reciprocity because, you do have to make yourself vulnerable. You've got to take a lot on psychologically when you do this. And that just didn't really transpire. And I should have known that before I signed up to do it, to be honest. But I didn't give it too much due. But so that was for me quite challenging. But yeah, this is sort of even putting this presentation together actually has been quite traumatic because not because I can't use PowerPoint, but because you've got to basically sift through a lot of images that are the journey of your residency. And, everyone who did it knows that it was incredibly traumatic to face up to these histories and then try to find what to pull out of it and represent your practice as. It was big. So yeah, I'm glad I've done it. I'm glad I got it out of my system. But this does very much feel like, yesterday's news now because I've sort of moved on into sort of new spaces. So yeah, that's the sort of load. This is the 2.5 minute film, but it won't play, will it? Oh, yeah, it will. Okay, cool. So I have that. So this is obviously making like these old paintings move. So that was my aha moment with this technology. I was just like, fuck me, these amazing paintings 300 years old are all of a sudden coming to life, people are stoking the fires and moving through these landscapes, and that just blew me away. So I asked all the estates and the artists if I can use their work, which was a process. But yeah, and then I made a film that's sort of a sort of maudlin, love song to the end, really. But it's quite hypnotic. It plays well on big screens. Yeah, and yeah, sorry about the low res, but yeah. Oh, we're good. Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's quite apocalyptic as well, which is just one-way street, isn't it? Really, but yeah, cool. So I'll leave that with you. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.